So, so anyway, man. So on this latest print, we have an annual growth timeline that I really relied heavily on you guys on, and it shows like I sketched all of the stages of growth. Um, but one thing I learned doing the research and talking to you guys is that a buck's testosterone triggers all of his major changes in antler development. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it fluctuates and what that does throughout the year?
Sure. There's a lot of seasonal changes, in hormone levels that are all driven by photoperiod, which means, the amount of daylight in any given day. Deer's eye detects that, sends that information to its brain, and then at different times of the year, based on light levels, a deer's brain is able to change the hormone levels in its body to either increase testosterone levels or decrease them. This is what drives the antler growth cycle in the breeding cycle.
Hmm.
So, for example, in January, as daylight amounts start to get a little longer each day, deer can detect this. This is what allows them to ultimately cast their antlers, or those antlers fall off. Testosterone levels stay very low then during, winter and spring. That's why all the bucks get bachelor groups. They're all together, they're buddy buddy. And it stays that way all fall or winter, spring, and summer while they're growing antlers. It all changes in late summer when, as the daylight, amount of daylight each day gets a little less. That is what triggers the body to then harden those antlers, shed the velvet, and begin breeding season. And that's when those bucks, basically all the social stuff really starts and all the fun stuff in the deer herd starts. The sparring, the fighting, all of this for breeding. So all of that is driven by hormonal changes, or I'm sorry, all of that is driven by photoperiod, regulated by hormonal changes.
Gotcha. So we just finished, about a month ago, like when bucks will shed. Is that a spike in testosterone? Like what biologically literally causes that velvet to shed? Is there anything for certain?
So that's increasing testosterone levels to harden those antlers and prepare for the breeding season. So yes, that's what causes them to shed that velvet. What's
Gotcha.
cool about this, Ryan, is we know that deer in northern latitudes have a very tightly defined rut. You get
Hmm.
closer to the equator, deer breed year round. And if you look at the photo period schedules from South Florida to Minnesota, they're very different. There
Hmm.
is a more of a peak in valley in like Minnesota than there is in Florida. They're doing some cool research right now at the University of Georgia. The tapetum is the layer in the back of a deer's eye that makes them shine. So, if you look at deer with a light at
Oh
night,
yeah.
the eyes shine. That effectively allows deer to, we don't have a tapetum. So light comes in, we see it. So in low light situations, we don't see well. Well, one of the reasons deer can is because the light hits that tapetum and gets reflected back across the eye. So essentially, deer get twice the light that we see. Anyway, with those tapetums, though, they are looking right now at tapetums all across latitudinal differences from deer eyes to see how tapetums, for example, in deer in Minnesota differ from those in Florida or more southerly sites.
Hmm.
So super cool. We know a bunch about photoperiod and how it changes. We're about to learn even more with individual deer in those different latitudes, how they see that differently. So pretty cool, but photoperiod is what drives the whole thing.
Wow. So speaking of buck shedding velvet, I learned a lot too about what makes an antlers dark or light. Talk to me a little bit about that. What
Yeah,
happens
that's
there?
pretty neat. As hunters, we know sometimes you see bucks with dark antlers, some with light. Some deer can have both dark and light on the same antler. But
Hmm.
in general, a little bit of this is driven by genetics, but across the deer population, a lot of it has to do with how quickly they get that velvet off once they start shedding. So, for example, if the velvet comes off because it's bloody underneath, if they rub really quickly, their antlers hard
Hmm.
and get the velvet gone, and then it tends to be a little lighter colored that given year.
Hmm.
Conversely, like if they leave that blood on there a little longer and it's able to dry into them, it tends to stain them a little more. They tend to be a little darker. So that's one piece that can contribute to color. What they rub can impact it. For example, if they're in areas where there's a bunch of pine trees, a bunch of sap and resin, other areas, as they rub those more, tends to be more coloration on those antlers than deer who aren't rubbing those as much. So that can contribute to color a little bit. And also just amount of time of the year. Some bucks early on after velvet shedding can be a little darker, but particularly deer in South Texas or in southern latitudes that have lots of sun over a long period of time, a buck that sheds out, say in September, by December or January, his antlers can actually look lighter than they did
Hmm.
early on simply from bleaching from the sun. So
Hmm.
lots of different things that can impact it. And that's why in any given population of deer, we see some bucks with dark antlers, some with light, and some with mixed colors on an individual deer.
That's cool, man. I we had a deer that showed up kind of late here last year by the house, and he was a big deer for the mountains, but the other thing that correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe like the rubbing activity, like an older deer that rubs more will have like if he rubs a lot on pine trees, he could have a darker rack
Exactly.
too,
Yep,
right?
you're right. You're right.
We had an old mature deer here, and there's a lot of white pines around, and his rack is literally the color of like a chocolate chip. I mean, it's extremely dark. I'm gonna go get it real quick. Hold on. So I mean, this is a typical like shed we found in Illinois, and this deer here is like chocolate. I mean, compared to that one, and
Absolutely.
I haven't seen him yet this year, but we found a shed really in the backyard. But when we were doing this print, because I'd never seen an antler that dark before, and then the thing it started adding up. Like there's a bunch of white pines around here. He shredded everything around here. He's an old deer, and maybe and then also the other thing you were talking about the bleach. It's very dark, very shaded, very thick around here. So he probably had all the recipes for a dark rack.
That's
But
cool. My young daughter shot a deer. We were in North Dakota last year, and she shot a 3-year-old buck with her antlers very similar to what you just showed. Really, both of them really chocolate. And when
yeah.
she saw it, it was immediately like, I want this one. And she had shot bigger deer than that. So I said, like, are you sure? And she said, I want. And it was just because the buck was so cool looking, very different antler coloration than anything she had ever shot. And fortunately, she was able to get it, and it is a beautiful rack.
Yeah.
For those reasons, very different, than anything else, and extremely unique. So it's cool that deer are like that. I mean, that it just
Yeah.
adds one of the things, or one of the reasons, I guess, that they are such cool creatures.
Yep. What about so in I believe in August we have here the Bucks go through a seasonal osteoporosis where they're pulling minerals back. Can you talk about that? And we go through a big period of time where everybody's putting minerals out where it's legal and trophy rocks and all that kind of stuff. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that there's a lot of medical research going on with deer for this exact thing. Deer grow, their antlers can grow, 1 to 2 inches or even over 2 inches a day during the peak of their growing. Because think about this, they're not growing for all that long, March or April to August. That's it. So they put on an incredible amount of bone, as we say, this is stuff that's ossified into bone. It takes a lot of minerals to do that, way more minerals than deer could ever uptake on a daily basis, from their diet. So one of
Hmm.
the things that allows the deer to do this is they pull minerals from their body, essentially the long bones of their body, while they are ossifying or hardening those antlers. If you touch a
Hmm.
deer that's in velvet during the summer, it's very warm and those are soft because it's a blood supply to provide those. As they harden or ossify, turn to bone, all of that tissue is mineralized into the hard antlers that we see. And so they literally can pull minerals from their body to do that. Hence the temporary osteoporosis. Fortunately, then in the fall, deer are able to replenish those very quickly. And man, we wish we knew exactly how they do that. If we could fully understand it, we could end osteoporosis in humans. So that's why there's
Hmm.
that medicinal research looking at it. And one of the reasons why we know deer need a lot of mineral content during the course of the year, and particularly there in the fall. Which is also one of the reasons why it is so important that we provide forage for deer that has a lot of minerals. And today, so much of the habitat work the rage is these old fields or this early successional vegetation, herbaceous matter, not woody stuff, but herbaceous
Hmm.
plants, things like clover or chicory or old field aster, jewelweed, ragweed, those kind of things. The calcium and phosphorus contents of those in particular, which are in the magnesium, the top pieces or ingredients in antlers, the amounts in these broadleaf plants are way above what the maximum amount deer can use.
Hmm.
So that is why deer love forbs, high quality food, lots of minerals, in part because they need an incredible amount of minerals during the year to provide high quality milk for fawns, and to grow antlers. So that's where they are getting those for the most part. That temporary osteoporosis allows them to draw from their long bones and then replenish them very quickly. But something that as humans we certainly can't do. It'd be cool if we could, and that's why so many people are looking at
That's amazing. Never knew that. You're a wealth of information, man.
it.
Talk. Tell us about the pedicle. I learned, I didn't know this, but it forms in the fetus. Tell us about the pedicle, how that influences the antler, why it's important, because I'm not sure a lot of people know that.
That pedicle is really cool. So think about it. So on a button buck or a buck fawn, those little bumps that you see on its head that form that first fall, that is the growth that will become his pedicle. That pedicle then will be the base for all future antler development. So while that deer is a fawn, if he injures those pedicles or we removed them, he would never grow antlers. He has to have those pedicles. This is also why people say, "Oh yeah, I found a shed antler from a buck fawn." No, you didn't, because they don't shed them. They keep those. That's what
Hmm.
That's where everything comes from before. So there are no shed antlers or those shed bumps. So that little bony structure that grows off the frontal bone there in the head, that first year is just a bump. It might even be pointed. Sometimes it even pops through the skin. But then that will form the basis for all future growth. That will be the pedicle. And then the next year, when they start growing antlers, the cells that are around that pedicle form the growing antler. And this is one
Okay.
of the things that's so cool about deer is those cells change during the course of that growth. So it starts as those cells at the pedicle will form into an antler, will grow that full antler, and then they're able to change, and ossify. So it's a very different type of cell than the rest of the body or what we have that allows them to do that. That's also though why any injury to that pedicle can cause deformed antlers. If you take material from that pedicle and actually move it to other parts of the body, you can grow an antler from a different part. They've taken
Yeah,
that material, put it on the forehead of mice. You can grow like a little antler off the forehead of mice.
that's
I'm sure
awesome.
you've seen bucks that have a third antler coming off the head somewhere. In almost every case, that was because of an injury to a pedicle. Move some of that material either on the nose or the face or by the eye, and it can grow another antler. So, and it's all
Wow.
because of that specialized material that's in that pedicle.
So jackalopes are actually possible. We
That's
may
right.
actually have real jackalopes one day
That's right.
instead of
That could be
just
the next
jokes
print.
mounted at a bar. What's that?
That could be your next print.
There we go, man. That would be awesome. So yeah, because we had a deer uh, 2 years ago on my mom and dad's place, and I had already tagged out, and I was deer hunting, just shoot some does, and just because I planned to deer hunt, I'm going to deer hunt. It doesn't matter if I'm tagged out. But there was a buck that came out, and he was missing half of his left ear, and it had rolled over. It was like a snow cone or something, and he was either a big year and a half old or a small 2.5-er. But I remember thinking that's awesome because we'll always be able to tell what that deer is because he's missing his ear. Um, well, then he blew up between, I guess it'd be 2.5 to 3.5, and then 3.5 to 4.5. He like maybe put on a little bit, but so I told my dad, I was like, we got to pass this deer. He's a homebody. He stays local. He's here every year. I'd passed him literally every single year since then, but he had about a 3-inch spike like a unicorn between his rack. And I'd never noticed it before, but at 4.5, I was like, we're not going to shoot this deer because He just didn't put on a lot. I knew he was only 4.5. He had potential, high rack, massive. I rattled him in, and he walked right underneath my stand. And I remember he had one right in the center. So when the pedicle is injured, so like I didn't notice that till 4.5, but that would have happened when he was young, or could that have happened like that summer when he had started growing an
Can
antler?
happen at any point. So at any
Anytime.
stage of his life, that pedicle can be injured. And if
Okay.
there was no deformity or no abnormal antlers before that, it probably didn't happen until later in his life. Because a lot
Hmm.
of times, once that pedicle is injured, you end up with some type of deformity to that antler. Not always, but many cases you do.
So if he got that unicorn point because the pedicle was injured and some of that material, that tissue got moved over, would it now permanently be a third pedicle, or was that just a temporary
That should
thing?
be. He should shed that because the pedicle growth that allowed that antler to grow. He most
Yeah.
likely would have shed that and grown an antler there again the next year.
Wow.
Yep.
That's crazy, man.
I had a guy bring me a European mount several years ago at a deer show I was at. Pretty good sized deer, and then it had maybe a 3-inch spike right out of the above the eye on
Yeah.
the left side, and he showed it to me from the front and said, "What would cause this?" I told him what we just shared here. He turned the head around to show me in the under the eye that had the antler, there was a broadhead embedded. So this deer had been shot in the eye the year before, survived, but when the shot had come down, it had nicked the base of the antler, embedded under the eye, and in the process moved some of that material to the eye. So the deer lived. The next year it grew its normal antlers plus that third one above the eye, which was just above where that broadhead was underneath. So
That's crazy.
pretty
Are they
crazy, but I feel bad for the deer, but a very clear
Yeah.
example of why it was there.
So is there any medical research like going that pedicle seems like a stem cell. I mean, it seems like it's like a wonder of nature. Is there any cool research going on with that?
There is, and then for those exact reasons, what you're just saying right there, deer antler growth, the whole thing, we now know is essentially a controlled version of cancer in deer. They can turn on
Huh.
those cells to grow that way, but then they can stop them at the end. So it's antlers are
Wow.
the only thing that grow as fast as tumors or fetal material in humans. So because of that, they look at there's again medicinal research, and then particularly because of the tie-in with cancer, and so deer purposely have this cancerous growth, but they're able to stop it so that it doesn't harm them. So that's another reason that we look at it because there could be answers to human cancers, there could be answers to human osteoporosis, and just the fact that they can grow that much antler each year, shed it, and then grow it again. That is just like you or me, cutting an arm off and regrowing a whole arm each year. So
That's
we
crazy.
also want to study it because then we could, cure or at least regrow fingers, arms, maybe even legs in humans. So there's a lot of people who have never hunted and never will hunt who are really really smart in the medical world that like deer. Maybe not as much as you and me, but they
Yeah.
like them for their abilities as well.
Yeah. That's amazing, man. Um, Talk to us a little bit while we're on the subject of like deformities. What are some of the things that make a non-typical and um, I guess like obviously we've all heard the story about if you injure a back leg, it'll cause a deformity on the left side. Does that stuff carry through year to year? How does that work? All that.
Sure, yeah. So most deformed antlers that we see are not a result of genetics. People think that they are.
Hmm.
Now, there definitely is a genetic influence, but most deformities we see are injury related. And it's either an injury to the antler itself or it's an injury to the body. So, and if you do a little bit of sleuthing, looking around it, you usually can figure out what likely caused it. So, if there's any injury to the pedicle at all, that whole antler is deformed from the base all the way out. If you
Hmm.
look at an antler that's injured, but the base is normal and the antler is normal, and then there's an injury later, that is an injury that has happened to that antler in velvet, during the growing season. So those the next year going to be an antler's going to be perfectly fine. If it's an injury to the base, they often do carry those year after year. Not always, but usually. If it's an injury to the body, these can be a little different as well. If the deer is injured in the back leg or the hind part, usually the opposite antler, as you mentioned, is deformed. And that's because the nerves that run from the back cross in the neck, which means injure its right hind leg, its left antler is going to be deformed. Always the left side. If it, so it crosses in the back. If it's an injury to the front of the deer, one of the front legs or shoulder, that injury can affect the antler on the same side, the opposite side, or even both sides. So that one isn't as clear cut as an injury to the back. The back is always opposite.
What about like a big non-typical that's non-typical on both sides and just has trash everywhere? Is that more genetic then?
That one it's both genetic and age related.
Okay.
There's some research that shows about 50% of the bucks out there have the genetic traits to have some abnormal things like drop tines, sticker points, kickers, all these things. But they have to live long enough to express them. Think about it like an NFL lineman. He had the genes to be really, really big, but he wasn't that big when he was only 10 or 11 years old. He had to mature to express them. Same thing with deer. Just like they have to mature to express antler growth potential, they have to mature to be able to show those genetic anomalies with regard to drop tines, et cetera, as well.
Yeah. I don't know about that football analogy, man. I'm coaching Rhett's football teams. He's 7. And sometimes you look at it like a 4th grader and it's like, that kid's 19. There's no way. Keep that kid away from my kid because he's going to level somebody.
That kid is one of the outliers. That's the 220-inch whitetail.
That's right.
That's what that is.
That's a 170-inch 3-year-old right there. Like, let that kid go. Feed him more because he's got more potential. Well, there was one more thing I was going to. So we have had like an internal conversation about this, and I've learned a lot, but I want to hear from you, from one of the OGs. What is the purpose of antlers? What is the function of a whitetail antler? Why do they have them at all?
To infatuate us and drive us crazy.
Well, it works.
All right. Now, so the reason is, and there's been a bunch of research on this as well. Certainly there's talk about, hey, is it just to attract mates? And there's research that shows that everything else being equal, a doe will pick a buck with bigger antlers. So take 2 bucks about the same size, same age, whatever. If one has bigger antlers, she's going to pick him. So there definitely is a little bit of an attraction thing with them. The biggest reason, though, is they are there for whitetails to compete with other whitetails for breeding rights. So there is definitely a protection mechanism involved where, they can maybe, a coyote or a wolf, they can keep them away a little bit. But more than anything else, they are made and designed to get together with another whitetail and then be able to use them to expose or express their strength and their intensity or aggression with another buck to secure breeding rights. So,
well, and I had said the other day too that I don't think the reason that they lock horns, it's not in their best interest for the species to kill each other, because they absolutely could sideswipe, T-bone another deer and kill him. Is that accurate, or did I
That's exactly
spread false
accurate.
information?
And I have a cool slide series that I've shown in many of the talks that I've given to, and these are young bucks, and it just happened to be on a multi-burst camera, and I got, I don't know, a dozen or 15 pictures in a row of 2 young bucks looking at each other. One turns, the other comes at him from quartering away and could so easily have just gored him in the ribs and killed the deer. He gets almost there, stops, allows the other deer to turn. They get their heads together, and then they fight like crazy, push each other.
Wow, that's cool.
So, super, super clear that, he could have easily killed him if that was the intent. Now, a lot of times what happens when they're fighting is, deer do die from that and deer get gored and all that, but that often is an artifact of what happens during the fight. It's less about one deer trying to gouge another. So they're trying to get those heads together and push and be able to show how strong and physical they can be. Yeah.
Spikes would rule the world, man, if that were the case.
That's right. Or deer, that have broke one antler off and just had that big old, single spike there on the other side.
Real quick, I know you got to run, man. Tell me that study. I've seen glimpses of that, and I don't quite remember how it worked. But that study where the doe chose the larger bucks. Can you unpack how they did that? It was pretty
Yeah, that
fascinating.
was super cool. That's out of Mississippi State University. The research pens, they had two pens that were side by side with an alleyway in between them. And they would put deer of approximately equal size and equal age in each of the pens and have a doe in the middle, and then allow her, all video cameras, so humans aren't messing it up, allow her to pick which deer she wanted to be with. They then took all their bucks and they cut their antlers off, and they developed these things, these harnesses where they could change the size of a deer's antlers. So they could put one on like this headgear where, he's a little bitty guy, maybe a little forkhorn, run him through the trials, see how the doe selected him. Then the same buck, they can put this great big set of antlers on and run through all this. And after all of this, what they found was does absolutely picked bucks with bigger antlers. Now, in the wild,
Wow.
this gets complicated a little bit by older bucks with larger body size and maybe more aggressive. They may win more of those breeding rights. So the research took all of that aside and wanted to see, okay, same size, same ages, bucks couldn't have access to each other to see who was actually meaner, just what the doe could see. So they would watch. She would, go over and lay a lot more with the buck, or against, there was a fence between them, but as close as she could to the buck, time and time again, the one that had bigger antlers. So size matters.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was telling Madison in the office, it's not like in the wild, it's not like The Bachelorette where she just like all the dudes are standing on a stage and she gets to pick the two. Like they're fighting, they're running. There may not be a mature deer there, or there may be multiple. But
that's right. And that's why a lot of young bucks do get in on the breeding rights, because you don't have to be the biggest buck in the woods. You just have to be the biggest buck right there when that doe is hot at that right time.
Yep. So I told you last question, but I lied because I've watched the past 2 years. I've watched 1.5-year-olds breed a doe right underneath my stand, and we a lot of times have this just kind of an easy myth in deer hunting, like, oh, we're going to let that big deer breed, but we're going to cull this one or do that. Like, talk a little bit about the muddy gene pool of whitetail deer, and because a lot of people don't think that the doe carries genetics for antlers too. Like, it's not just the buck. So talk a little bit about that.
That's right. The doe carries half of the genetics for antler growth for, any of her potentials or future sons. So she carries half, the buck carries half, but the doe actually has a bigger influence because she provides 100% of the maternal care. So that buck fawn could have the genes to be the biggest buck on the planet. But if his mom doesn't take good care of him, provide him much milk, he will never show what his potential is. So the doe gives half the genes and all the care. So she has a big say in what he's going to do. And we know, actually, this is brand new research out of Texas that shows that, only about a third of the buck's gross antler score is inherited from his dad.
Wow.
That's it. So, they have these huge bucks that have small sons. They have, some smaller bucks that have big sons. So we just learned more and more that we cannot tell by looking at a deer's antlers what his future offspring will be. It's not strongly inherited at all. So keys are, let those bucks get a little older, make sure we do good habitat work so they get good food, and then just reap the rewards of the ones that get to be big.
Amen to that, man. Well, real quick, where you got anything you want to talk about coming up with NDA? Anything you want to plug, or where they can find you?
Sure. They can find me at kip@deerassociation.com. Anybody can email me. I'm glad to talk to them about hunting or answer questions. Deerassociation.com is our website. All kinds of free stuff there that folks can grab, or our YouTube channel to see videos. And hunting season is here. So the thing I'll plug from us is I hope everybody is safe this fall. Make sure that you're tied in when you're climbing, whether it's a lock-on, a climber, or a ladder stand. Be tied in from when you leave the ground to get back, and take somebody new to the woods this year and show them how cool it is.
Awesome, man. Kip, we appreciate it, buddy.
Hey,
thank you for everything. Yeah, man, you too. We'll be in touch, man.
Sounds good.
I appreciate
Good luck hunting.
All right. Thanks, bud.